I cut you off tantalizingly mid-thought.
There has been this game being played in Washington, and part of these statements, you heard Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell say it's a 2.4% cut. That's because Medicare is exempted, largely Social Security. When you look at what is actually getting cut, the actual programs affected by the sequester, it's more like 7 to 10% for those programs. And then when you go into that, there has been this effort among particular Republicans in Washington to try to make the sequester's cuts to hide them. And what I thought was the most sickening episode in this whole very, very sad affair was when Washington had a freak out about White House tours being canceled. And this was this amazing thing, because this is something that these congressmen were actually hearing about.
Goodies.
It's the smallest. If you're going to cut anything in government, cut the White House tours. Get it gone.
It was a perfect example, because the issue behind the deficit is the donor class's dominance of our politics. And that little goodie is what
goes for the
goes to donors.
To people who talk to their congressmen.
The people who talk to their congressmen, and who, you know what they're complaining about?
In your
taxes.
program. They don't, I mean, I would imagine most of them don't have a direct line to their congressman. And so the congressman doesn't hear about it. It's a cut that, for the functions of Washington politicians, they don't feel.
Right. And I mean, that's something that our program tries to increase is the awareness of our families to be able to do these things and advocate for themselves. But if we're getting cut, how do we do that? It's a vicious cycle.
And the program you have, you said you got the early learning program, about 125 kids in that. There's a waiting list for that, I imagine?
Well, yeah. I mean, it serves the community in a great way.
And so if the zombie apocalypse, as Jeff said, and Jeff, I want to ask you about what the zombie apocalypse looks like from where you're standing. If the zombie apocalypse happens, right? What I think is so perverse here is that each successive austerity fight has had less and less attention to it. This is a great graphic. This is the Americans paying very close attention to Washington fiscal deadlines. So the debt ceiling, 38%, fiscal cliff, 40%. Now sequestration was down to 25%. And what it's done is it's kind of brain deadened all of us about what's actually happening. So if we're 6 months from now and the cuts do come out and they do accelerate, what are you looking at? What does it mean in human terms for the kids and the families you serve?
It can mean so many things. It can mean a shorter day for our children. It could mean less staff, which would mean that we're affecting the children in the program and our staff members, our employees, who rely on these jobs to you know, provide for their families and better themselves. It impacts the parents of those children. These parents are now leaving their children in childcare, feeling that they're leaving their children in a reliable, safe place, and they're going to get job training. They're going to get their GED so they can advance.
Also, if you walk into a working parent's life and say, we're going to take away 2 hours of childcare,
that's huge.
Good luck.
That's huge.
Jeff, you sound like if this stays in place, you're worried that your job might be on the chopping block.
Yeah, I am. And while I'm a pale juxtaposition to your other guests and their wonderful organizations, yeah, if I recently took this job from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to move up here to Fort Meade, to the D.C. area, to better myself, to have an opportunity to improve and succeed. And because I just took this job right when this happened, I can only imagine I have to doomsday prep for that inevitability that if they're not going to furlough forever, so what they're going to do is they're going to cut. I would imagine. I have to plan for that anyways. And if they cut, then I'm out of a job. So, I'm the new one in.
So is there a point, Heather, Ezra, is there a point where it does become visible? It goes from being invisible to visible, and DC wakes up?
It becoming visible to people out in the communities is one thing. It becoming visible beyond White House tours to the people who are decision makers is a completely different thing. I mean, what more visibility do you need than 20 million people who are un- and underemployed, than so many cutbacks in state funding for education that people are graduating with $25,000 in debt? I mean, what more visibility does Washington need? That's a democracy question, in my opinion.
I think this is to go on that exact point. This is not the time. There is waste, and not that much of it. That's one of the key things in the government. But to put people out of work at a time when we have 3 or 4 people for every single job opening is unbelievably unwise and indecent.
Ezra Klein, editor of Wonk Blog, Heather McGhee of Demos, Shana Hewitt of the Early Childhood Education Center in Brooklyn, and Army Reservist Jeff Maryak. joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Well, that is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts now. Good evening, Rachel.